All right, everyone. Well, thank you very much for attending our event. My name is Joe Bach. I'm the president of Rutgers Federalist Society. Joining us today from George Mason University School of Law is Professor Stephen Eagle. Now, Professor Eagle received his BA from City College of New York. He received his Juris Doctorate from Yale University. And Professor Peter Simmons from Rutgers School of Law will be introducing both Professor Eagle and his topic, affordable housing in the really new property. Thank you very much.
One of the few things I learned as dean was to get your applause up front, because after you get down to business, there aren't going to be very many people who feel like applauding. Welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to express my personal appreciation to Mr. Bach and his fellow students for organizing this venture. Whether one is a Federalist or an anti-Federalist, you have to concede that when the Federalists run a program, they do an honest program with a diversity of viewpoint, and that is certainly very welcome. My role today is to speak long enough so that you can finish getting your food, so that it won't be embarrassing when Professor Eagle is speaking, and to introduce him to you. I first met Professor Eagle when we were both young and Buckeyes. That is, we were in Ohio. He was teaching at the University of Toledo. I was teaching at Ohio State, and we served on a year or two at what have you. So it's been probably 30, 35 years since I've seen him. He has at least as much hair today as he did then. Whereas I used to have a full head of hair and used to be 7 feet tall. Those are all things past. Among his more notable accomplishments, Professor Eagle is the author of an invaluable treatise, a one-volume treatise on regulatory takings. And if you are interested in the general topic of land use and takings law, you can't do without his book. My one criticism is that in its current edition, which I believe is the 3rd edition, it's grown to about 5 inches thick and weighs 400 pounds. So it's somewhat burdensome. Other than that, well, it's a magnificent contribution to literature. I was asked to serve as a moderator in a debate between Professor Eagle and our own Professor Trout. Due to a family illness, Professor Trout is unable to attend. So we don't really have a debate, though I suggested to Mr. Bach that he ask Professor Eagle to state the most persuasive counter-argument to every affirmative point that he's going to make, so that you and the audience will understand what the alternatives are. And he, as an experienced teacher, of course, is accustomed to doing that. Whether he will follow through is a matter for him to decide. We were going to talk about, I believe, should cities and states subsidize housing for low-income individuals? That's what attracted my attention, and that's why I invited my class to attend today. I understand that the topic has now been changed to affordable housing and the really new property. However, Professor Eagle has assured me through his email that he will devote some time to the question of cities and states, etc. So, without further delay, let me turn the platform over to Professor Eagle, and we thank you very much for joining us.
We will also have a question and answer period after Professor Eagle's presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe Bach and other members of the Rutgers Newark chapter of the Federalist Society for inviting me here today. had the pleasure of speaking at a number of chapters over the years, and it's really wonderful that you can put on programs. And as Dean Simmons said, usually programs do involve getting different points of view. So I will try to present different points of view, so I can't contradict myself because I'm presenting different points of view. I'd like to also thank Dean Simmons for that very warm introduction, and it is a pleasure to be here, although I should say we are now in the 4th edition of the book, and the publisher would be more than pleased to sell you a copy. And you certainly need some for the library. Students can get them too, so they're available. So it's fun. I do the supplement every year, and it keeps me up to date on all kinds of things. And I am sorry that Professor Trout couldn't be here today because I was looking forward to a debate. Many of the, but not all, but many of the Federalist Society presentations I've done involve debates, and it's a lot of fun. A few years ago, I was scheduled to speak at the Federalist Society chapter at Queens College Law School, CUNY Law School, which, as you may know, has as its mission being a progressive law school, maybe the most left law school in the United States. The Federalist Society chapter heads worked valiantly to try to get a debating partner for me. Email after email to property teachers at the school went unanswered. Finally, the president of the chapter cornered one and said, well, you know, I've been sending you all these emails. Will you debate Professor Eagle or not? And she looked at him and glared and said, well, no, we decided we're not going to legitimize his visit. So my visit was not legitimized, illegitimately. I could call it worse, I should add. And so it was a fun occasion. But it is nice to be able to get different points of view. Now, I will start out, for those who came under these pretenses especially, thinking about should cities and states subsidize housing for low-income individuals. And of course, who could possibly be against affordable housing? That sounds great. There's some problems here, though, I want to talk about. First, unfortunately, there is no such thing as affordable housing. Now, there is housing, or more accurately, there are houses, there are apartments in various places and in various conditions, and whether housing is affordable depends largely, no shock here, on how many there are and how many people want, also known as the law of supply and demand. As William Tucker said, housing is housing, and the only thing that makes it affordable is if there is plenty of it. When there is ample housing, it's likely to be relatively cheap, even when it's brand new. When housing is scarce, on the other hand, as in New York, people will pay remarkably high prices for accommodations that are often remarkably dilapidated. And indeed, I've been in places in Manhattan where people have paid a lot of money for places that anywhere else would not look outstanding. I will leave it at that. Now, in fact, in the entire vast middle part of the United States, with some exceptions, but basically through the entire middle of the country, the South, through the Midwest, into the plains, the cost of new housing equals the cost of building housing. In this part of the country, especially in the Northeast, and especially on the Pacific Coast, the cost of building housing roughly is the cost of building housing in half. The other half is the cost of permitting. So that the cost of permitting, broadly addressed, really is just as much as the cost of housing. By permitting, I mean, first and foremost, getting permission to build. In many areas of the country, large lot zoning is the rule. You just can't go out and buy a piece of vacant land and build on it. You have to get permission. That permission requires all kinds of studies, all kinds of evidence that one will provide amenities for the community, and it becomes very, very expensive and difficult to build housing. I should say, as an aside, because it's been the news lately, that the cost of major construction projects also is roughly half permitting and half engineering and construction. The engineering and construction of the project are about half its cost. The other half is getting it approved. And so when you think of the interstate highway system, probably could never be done today. When you think of the University of California, which was put up in immense campuses all over the state by essentially a middle-class society, it's hard to see it being done. They were just basically frantically trying to hold it together, in fact. You think of, it's been the news lately, the tunnels connecting New Jersey and Manhattan. Why should two small tunnels cost so much money? Well, it's not because of construction costs. It's because of other costs, which is okay if people want to do it, but I think there's not much awareness of how expensive it is to follow all sorts of mandates, which we might think in a world where we have lots of money to do all kinds of things would be nice to do. But unfortunately, the public is never asked to balance the cost of those things against not having half the projects they otherwise could have had. The problem of affordable housing, as I've said, is not national in scope precisely because permitting problems, zoning problems, planning problems tend to be focused much more in certain parts of the country than others. Two housing economists who are leaders in the field, David Glazer and Joseph Grunko at Harvard, have said that zoning and other land use controls are responsible for high prices when we see them. If policy advocates are interested in reducing housing costs, then they should do well to start with housing reform. Building small numbers of subsidized housing units, which is the immediate topic of that was planned for today, even if well-targeted, are unlikely to have more than a trivial impact on average housing prices, even if well-targeted towards deserving poor households, of which I'll say more in a few minutes. However, reducing the implied zoning tax on new construction could have a massive impact on housing costs. Now, I live in Fairfax County, Virginia, which is basically just west of Washington, D.C., on the south side of the Potomac River. On the north side of the river is Montgomery County, Maryland, which is a similar size and population. Montgomery County has started and occasionally funds a program of subsidies for affordable housing, which is now largely called workforce housing. The subliminal message there is this goes to the people who work in your communities, who do things for you, not the undeserving poor. That's what you're supposed to read into the phrase workforce housing instead of affordable housing. But Montgomery County has a program of this kind, and it's very small, and it's hard to get funding for it. But at the same time, the western half of the county basically is zoned for 10-acre zoning for agricultural preservation. This is a prime area in what is now the inner half of the suburban belt around Washington, D.C., and it's off limits for development. And I think that if areas like that could be built, probably there will be food in the grocery stores anyway, and certainly there would be a lot more housing, and I think it would alleviate a large part of the housing problem. What could governments do to alleviate the housing problem? One is to spend a lot of public tax money on subsidizing housing, which is not popular because, well, voters don't like it. And it's too obvious. The problem really is transparency in large part. You don't want to take money and use it for something that taxpayers think they should spend the money on. So there are all kinds of